Mr. President, there's been a lot of conversation about the damage to our economy and to the basic operations of government from the shutdown. Rightfully so. That is something we should talk about and spend some time trying to be able to figure out how to be able to manage this for the future. What shutdowns really do to our system. But what's been interesting is how absent that same conversation has been over the last 2 years as my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have actively worked to be able to shut down the basic operations of government by not allowing nominations to proceed in the normal process. In December, with little fanfare and into early January, 386 nominations from the Trump administration were returned back to the Trump administration with a no action. 386 people. Those were judges, those were potential board members, those are individuals, many of them deputy assistant secretary of different agencies, individuals that keep the basic functioning of government open and working. 386 of those nominations had no action on this floor because something very different was happening during the last 2 years that had not happened on 2 years previous like this before in the beginning of any presidency. That is, nominations were blocked on the floor, not with a vote, with time. You see, in the past, nominations were done. A person would be nominated by the president, they would go to the committees, they would get a full background check and investigation, there would be questions for the record. The committees would then have an open debate in a committee. They would vote as a committee. If they were voted out of committee, there'd be additional questions for the record. And then once those were done, they would get an up or down vote. Often those were voice votes even here. They were something that was assumed because they'd been approved by committees and the background checks had been done. But in the last 2 years, 128 times, members of the Senate required what's called a cloture vote, one more hurdle to go through. So that literally they would have to what's called file cloture on those, allow for an intervening day for them to sit out there, and then 30 hours of debate on that person. 30 hours of additional debate. So that's after the intervening day. So it's really, you've got 24 hours plus another 30 that's all set out there to add a little additional time. Now, with over 1,000 nominees that the executive branch would do, it's not possible to be able to get through all those if you continue to be able to request an additional 2 days, basically, in the process to be able to work on each of them. And so for individuals to prevent these different agencies from working and functioning, to prevent the activities of government, you can just request cloture votes over and over and over again, 128 times, to basically slow the Senate down so much and to slow down the workings of government all over D.C. so much that it can't operate at its capacity. This has to be resolved. 2 years ago, I saw this trend that was moving in the Senate, and I said, long term for the Senate, this will damage the functioning of government and of the Senate. We have to address it. So 2 years ago, I asked for a reach out to be able to say, how do we actually resolve this? And we had some ongoing meetings. We had a full committee hearing dealing with this issue of the nominations process and how to resolve this in December of 2017. That was after months and months and months of meetings in preparation for that. We had a markup in April of 2018 to be able to talk about how could we resolve this? What are proposals that are out there? I had numerous conversations with Republican and Democratic members of the Senate to be able to resolve the issue of the Senate. Because though in the past, you could always request a cloture vote on someone if there was someone truly controversial, this was being used different. This was not being used to address someone truly controversial. This was being used to shut down the functioning of government. Many of those individuals, once they did get their cloture vote in that obligatory time, many of them passed with 80 and 90 votes. They weren't people, as I've heard people say, if Trump would put up better nominees, then this would be easier. It wasn't that. It was purely dilatory to slow down or shut down agencies' operations based on not allowing them to hire staff to be able to actually do the job. That government shutdown that has been ongoing for 2 years' time will continue to go until this Senate resolves it. So, after 2 years of meetings, I'm making a proposal to this body. We need to fix this. We need to fix the nomination process to give an orderly process so when there's a controversial nominee, they can be addressed with additional time on the floor, even past the committee time, even past the background checks, even past the additional questions that they're asked to give additional time, but in a reasonable way to do it so that we continue to be able to operate as a Senate. So my simple proposal is we have 2 hours of additional debate if additional time is allotted, and quite frankly, that's after the intervening day, so there'd be a full day of debate and then an additional 2 hours on the next day that would be allotted to give full time to anyone that may be a problem. That's 2 hours of additional blocked off time in addition to the additional day that's put in place. I think that's plenty of time. Now, if it's a Supreme Court justice that we're talking about, if it is a cabinet official, maybe 30 hours would be the best option for that as well. So we do 2 hours for most nominees, 30 hours for cabinet level and for Supreme Court or Circuit Court. That gives plenty of time to do additional debate. And it simplifies the process. Now, this proposal is not really all that controversial. I've talked to many of my Democratic colleagues, and they seem to nod their head and say, yes, this is a better way to resolve it. But the answer I'm getting back is, let's vote for that now, but let it not start until January of 2021. Because their assumption is they're going to beat President Trump in an election, and they'll take over, and they certainly don't want the Senate to function when there's a Democratic president the same way that it's functioning when there's a Republican president. My gentle nod back to them is there's absolutely no way we should ever agree to that. Why would we ever do that? What's happening is the last 2 years, in the shutdown, slowdown of all these agencies that's happened by blocking all these nominees, it's created this muscle memory in the Senate. And if we don't fix it now, it's going to keep going. And my Democratic colleagues say we're going to continue to block you for the next 2 years the same way to shut down the functioning of agencies with some delusional belief that 2 years from now that this won't happen back for them if they happen to win the presidency is false, and they know it. If we don't resolve this now, and allow this president to be able to function with his nominees as any president in the past has, then this is going to just keep going. And it will hurt the long-term functioning of our government. So it's an absurd thought to say, we'll vote on it now, but we won't actually take effect until 2021. The reasonable thing is, let's resolve it now. So this simple proposal I'm putting out in the next few days will make it public. And in February, I hope that there'll be a meeting with the Rules Committee to allow open debate in the Rules Committee. Republicans and Democrats alike to be able to look at this issue and to be able to resolve it, to make any edits or changes. If there's a different way to be able to resolve this, I'm open to any other resolution. But for the long-term health of our government and of the Senate and how it operates, we've got to be able to resolve this. Because we can't have individuals hanging out there for over a year and expect that this is going to get better. Let me give you some examples. For over a year, the Assistant Secretary of Health and Human Services has sat out there and then was returned back to the President at the end of the session and will have to start all over again. Same thing with the Chief Counsel for Advocacy in the Small Business Administration, the Inspector General in the Office of Personnel Management, governors for the United States Postal Service, the Assistant Secretary of Commerce, the Ambassador to Colombia, the Ambassador to Morocco, the General Counsel for the Department of Navy. These were all individuals that were out there for over a year with no action, waiting. We will not get the best and brightest in our country to set aside their life for a nomination process that's over a year, then goes back to the White House, and then they have to start all over again the next year, and maybe it goes another year. Who in America can put their life on hold for all that time? We want the best and brightest to be able to serve. Blocking them with slow-down tactics will prevent that from happening in the future. So I'm trying to be fair in this process. Let's do this the right way, the way that we all know it should be done. Let's take it to the Rules Committee. Let's put a proposal out there to be able to fix the nomination process. Let's get the 60 votes that are required to be able to resolve the nomination process through the Rules Committee to the floor of the Senate and actually be able to fix that as a standing order. And let's resolve it now, lest this drags on for another 2 years and it never gets better. This has been a 2-year process to get to this point. And in the days ahead when we release this text out, I hope my colleagues will engage in reasonable conversation to be able to resolve that. I'm open to that. But I want us to fix a problem and admit that a problem needs to be fixed and solve it. Mr. President, I yield the floor.